Hey guys, this is Philosophossum, and happy Black History Month everybody. Seeing as it is Black History Month, I figured I'll take on some videos regarding racism and race-related issues. This is a topic I've actually wanted to address for a while now, but never really got around to, so I figured now's as good a time as any. Anyways, I figured I'd start off with a short video. It's just over 2 minutes long, and it comes from the Huffington Post, in which they try to explain to us why reverse racism isn't a thing. Yeah, this should be good, so let's get into it. So right from the onset, the woman who's presenting this video makes it very clear what the main message of this video is going to be. Like, there is no ambiguity here.
So here are some quick and dirty facts on reverse racism. 1. Reverse racism does not exist. 2. Reverse racism is not real. 3. No. Seriously, it's not a thing.
So there you go. Did you guys get that? Just so that we're perfectly clear and that there's no ambiguity at all whatsoever, they're trying to establish that reverse racism is in fact not a thing that exists. Just in case you weren't clear on that. Joking aside, it does seem like we are off to a good start here. Yeah, I agree, reverse racism doesn't exist. See, my problem with the term reverse racism is that it implies that racism has some kind of natural direction to it. Like white people are somehow naturally preordained to be racist against black people, and if a black person is racist against white people, that's some sort of inversion to the natural flow of things. Like, racism is simply discrimination based on race. That's it. I don't understand why we need to go muddying the waters by introducing all this different terminology to describe it. Like, if a white person hates black people, it's called this, but if a Hispanic hates Asians, it's called that. Like, wouldn't it just be much simpler to unify under the cause of, hey, judging people based on their ethnic background isn't cool, let's not do that.
Things like BET, Black Girls Rock, or Black History Month are not reverse racist against white people.
Well, I mean, technically speaking, these things are racist, because like I mentioned before, racism is broadly defined as discrimination based on race. Now, because these things are discriminating in a way that's positive, like they're attempting to showcase aspects of black society and culture, as opposed to ridicule them or put them down, we probably wouldn't be inclined to consider them a problematic form of racism, but since it does technically discriminate based on race, it's still technically racist. On top of that, people aren't criticizing these things for being racist per se. The criticism is more in regards to a sort of double standard going on. Like when we have a whole month dedicated to black history, or an entire television channel dedicated to showcasing entertainment created by black people, you know, these are examples of black empowerment, examples of celebrating black culture and history. But if you were to, for example, have similarly a white history month or white entertainment television network, that would immediately be labeled as racist and discriminatory and oppressive or whatever. But what I think is most problematic about this is that she's essentially trying to make it seem as if black on white racism is being blown out of proportion by cherry picking very trivial examples like television networks and shit. Like there are examples of white people being dragged out of their car and beaten, all because they just so happen to make a wrong turn into a black neighborhood.
Because remember, in a society where white is seen as the default race...
Well, what's a default race exactly? That strikes me as kind of an arbitrary concept. I mean, what exactly is the criteria for determining what the quote default race would be? I mean, would it be the race that has the most number of people living in an area? Is it whichever race is most influential? Like, I don't get this concept.
All history is white history.
It's false.
Leave it to a person who's supposed to be lecturing the rest of us on racism to say something incredibly racist. Not to mention downright wrong. Saying all history is white history couldn't be further from the truth. Many different racial groups have made contributions to this country and therefore part of its history. The United States is one of the most racially diverse countries on the planet. Whites, blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Muslims, Native Americans. People from all these different groups help build this country and make it as great as it is. All these different groups are part of our history, so it's definitely racist to say that all of our history is about white people. Now, of course, you could make the argument that most of our history is focused on white people, and that's because the United States, along with many other Western countries, is mostly populated by white people. It kind of makes sense that they'd be most frequently mentioned in the country's history. That doesn't really have much to do with racism or discrimination. Like if you were to study the history of Japan, most of it would refer to Asians. That's not because Japan as a country is racist or anything like that, it's just because most of the people there are Asian, therefore most of the history is going to be referred to Asians.
But racism isn't just someone feeling superior to another race and then discriminating against them. That's just the tip of a very messed up iceberg.
According to pretty much every definition there is, racism is simply just discrimination or prejudice based on one's ethnic background. Like, that's it, end of story. You often hear this rather absurd argument, and it mostly comes from the left-wing woke sort of crowd, but they argue basically something to the effect that, by definition, black people can't be racist against whites because racism requires institutional power or some other sort of ingredient above and beyond simple discrimination based on race. It's an absurd and baseless argument, but one that you'll hear quite often.
Racism works on both an individual and societal level.
You're correct, sir!
This is actually true. Racism, like many other problems, can affect both individuals and society at large. And just like many other problems, it can be helpful to analyze and tackle it from both angles. That being said, as you'll see here in a minute, she's going to go on to undermine this point by solely choosing to focus on racism at a societal level and ignoring the individual level. By basically ignoring this important piece of the puzzle, you're making it more difficult to actually address the issue at large.
Minorities have fewer opportunities to express prejudice against whites.
Well, first of all, citation needed. Second of all, even if that was true, that doesn't prove that there's less black on white racism. That only proves that there's less opportunities for it to manifest. Third of all, so what? Even if it were true that minorities had less opportunities to be discriminatory towards white people, I don't actually understand what sort of point that would get across. Like, would it somehow be okay if they did?
And they lack the institutional power that protects them if they do.
This isn't entirely accurate. Thanks to certain affirmative action laws, it is actually legal to discriminate against white people in ways that wouldn't be allowed for other races. So she's kind of talking out her ass here.
Let me reiterate. A black person expressing racial prejudice or backwards ideas about white people or any other race is not okay.
Well, that's good. I'm glad she acknowledges that black people holding prejudicial views against people of other races is just as bad as if anyone else did it. I suppose that's another thing we can agree on.
But on a structural level, black prejudice does not affect the rights of white people.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's say it together. 3, 2, 1... Citation needed!
It doesn't affect the rate at which white people go to jail, experience police brutality, unemployment, poverty, or housing discrimination. Minorities deal with these realities at a much higher number.
Sure, maybe it is the case that there are certain problems out there that disproportionately affect minority communities more than whites. But that could be for a multitude of reasons, not just racism. What she's essentially describing here are complex social, political, and economic issues. These are issues that are very multi-layered and multifaceted and might have any number of contributing factors. You can't just take these complex social issues that minority communities are facing and boil it down to evil white man bad.
Someone with a white-sounding name?
Well, hold on. What's a white-sounding name? Well, first of all, the concept of a white-sounding name is kind of racist. Not that I personally care, but this does kind of go back to that double standard I mentioned before. Like if you said Natasha is a black-sounding name, or Hernandez is a Hispanic-sounding name, or Hung Lee is an Asian-sounding name, you'd be labeled a racist. But apparently it's just fine to talk about white-sounding names. But a lot of names are actually pretty racially neutral. What about like Ed or Smith? Like I know both white and black people with those names. Lee is another example of a name that's pretty racially neutral. Like I know whites, blacks, and Asians who are named Lee.
Is 50% more likely to get a job call back than someone with an ethnic-sounding name.
Yeah, because white people can never have ethnic-sounding names. Like I'm white and my last name is actually Hungarian in origin.
Black people are more likely to be killed by police.
That's actually been debunked. On average, more whites are actually killed by police.
And twice as likely to be killed while unarmed.
This is actually true, but not for the reason she's implying. It is correct that blacks on average are more likely to be killed or attacked than whites, but there's an important aspect of this statistic that she's conveniently leaving out. While it is true that blacks are more likely to be attacked or killed on average than whites, what she's conveniently not mentioning is that more often than not, it's the blacks who are doing the attacking and killing. Yes, if you're black, you're more likely to be attacked, but you're more likely to be attacked by another black person as opposed to a white person. By leaving this out, she can make it seem as if this comes down to racism when it really doesn't.
What's the reverse of that?
The reverse of that would be for minority communities to actually do something to address the problems they're facing as opposed to simply blaming them on white people.
If you think about it, reverse racism would actually be kind of great.
What? What the fuck?
Because it would mean that we lived in a society where all racial groups had equal power. But we don't.
Hey pal, You just blowing from Stupid Town?
Okay, so your problem isn't with racism, it's with racism that doesn't fit your political agenda. Like, she just came out and admitted that she's more concerned with how much power different racial groups have over each other as opposed to how fairly they're being treated. I think this is like a perfect example of how the left only gives a fuck about a problem when it's convenient for their political agenda, otherwise they could give a rat's ass.
So do those who cry reverse racism when a show like Blackish premieres?
The only people who tend to complain about shows that employ racial humor are people like you on the left. Like, I personally love shows like The Boondocks and Everybody Hates Chris. Like, I think racial humor can actually be pretty funny. The only people who ever complain about it are people on the left.
Or when President Obama uses the N-word?
You'll have to specify which version of the N-word you're talking about. Is it the one that ends in ER or the one that ends in A? Because one of them's an offensive racial slur and the other one's a common term of endearment.
Please, just stop.
Oh, poor baby.
Yeah, please don't disagree with the narrative I'm pushing, or critically evaluate the things I have to say. That would hurt my feelings. You know, the video of Arthur addressing racism might not have been 100% on par, but at least they encouraged open discussion about the matter. Like, they weren't just spoon-feeding you a narrative and expecting you to shut up and accept it without critically evaluating it. You know, I honestly have no idea what the point of this video was. Like, she was just continuously jumping around between different points. It's hard for me to get a feel of what sort of message I was supposed to take away from it. Like, she starts off by arguing that black-on-white racism doesn't exist. Then she goes on to argue that it does exist, but it's not that big of a problem. Then she argues that black-on-white racism would be great if it existed. Like, seriously, what's the message of this video? Is it that racism is bad? Is it that racism is good, so long as all groups are equally racist against each other? Like, I legit have no idea what the message is I'm supposed to get across here. But yeah, anyways, until next time, this has been Philosophy Making Stupidity Play Dead. Have a good one.